Why and how ready should we be for the next pandemic?
Well, governments are there to protect us. And so, they have us practice for earthquakes. They have a fire department with lots of full-time people to stop fires. They have armies that are there to deal with wars. But the pandemic is a disaster that they didn't prepare for. The actual resources required to have a global surveillance team, to make better diagnostic technologies, to do quick detection. It's actually not going to be that expensive once the world gets organized and makes it a priority.
So active preparedness for the next pandemic, because as you've said, it's not a matter of if, but when. How do we actively prepare? And are you seeing...
Just one thing that I think many of you have probably already gotten repulsed by: the government's job is to protect us. Keep playing. I got to hear this.
Anywhere in the world where there's actual preparedness for a future pandemic right now?
Well, there's some good innovation. The idea of improving the vaccines so that they block getting infection, making them so they last a long, long time. Being able to make very cheap diagnostics that you could literally produce billions of very quickly. So the innovation side, I think, is starting to move. But picking how we strengthen WHO, create a special organization dedicated to pandemics, how we staff that, how we get every country to practice. For fire, you've got fire drills, you've got signs. So we need a little bit of preparation so that we actually can stop something before it goes global. So we'll have lots of outbreaks, but we don't need to have pandemics.
Right.
Can you appreciate what he just said?
Why
at the beginning?
and how ready?
First of all, why? Why should we be ready for a pandemic? What a hard-hitting question coming from Al.
Should we be for the next pandemic?
Well, governments are there to protect us, and
end it there. Governments are there to protect us. Does it matter that throughout the histories of government, not only have they not protected people, not only have they not protected their citizens, but they've actually and actively done harm to their citizens? Governments are there. First of all, before I even start, why does this guy have a microphone? I know everybody jokingly says he bought it. He has, what's the word? Like curated geopolitics so that he now has the bullhorn, because that bullhorn was purchased. He became a billionaire because of his unscrupulous business practices in tech, such that he could then buy the influence of organizations, buy the influence of governments, such that a computer tech guy, and I'm not one who says stay in your lane. There's no reason why a computer tech guy can't know about pandemics. There's no reason why Elon Musk, who's a rocket guy, can't know about social media. But that doesn't mean that just because they are a billionaire tech guru, if that's what you want to call Bill Gates, that he knows anything about anything other than the fact that he's bought the bullhorn. Governments are there to protect us, except when they experiment on us. And I'm not talking COVID, people, if that's what you thought. Tuskegee experiments. Governments are there to protect us, except when they commit atrocities against us that subsequent governments have to apologize for, such, at residential schools in Canada. Governments are there to protect us, except when, they poison us and then have to cover up the poisoning of their own citizens. That was, that they knew about. Governments are there to protect us. Wrong, Bill Gates. Governments are there to do the absolute bare minimum that governments need to do to maintain a civilized society. Law and order, critical infrastructure. Governments are not there to keep people safe, because governments, A, are incapable of doing it, and B, they have been historically corrupt entities that have not done it, that have exploited their monopoly on violence to cause harm to the people they are supposed to represent and others. Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. Listening to him talk, we should just get vaccines ready for the next pandemic. You don't even know what the next pandemic is going to be yet. You've already found the solution. And it's like people now, they just talk about vaccines like it's like a Band-Aid. Like, oh, okay, so we're going to have a pandemic. We'll just develop a vaccine. It's like that lawsuit that I was in with this useless partner of a shareholder whose contribution to the company was make it better, make it cheaper. Oh, okay, great. How? Make it better, make it. Oh, we're going to have a pandemic. Let's just make a vaccine. We need to get better at making the vaccines for the pandemic. So let's do some research on what's the word I'm looking for? Gain of function research on potential pathogens, and then develop a vaccine for it so that if and when that vaccine, that pathogen gets released, whatever the reason, whatever the accident, well, we have a vaccine ready for it. Let's do research on pathogens in order to develop a vaccine for a pandemic, the cause of which we don't yet know, the pathogen of which we don't yet know. And all of you asking where this pathogen came from, shut your mouths. It came from nature. It came from people eating bats and pangolins. And don't ask, because it's apparently now in today's trust the science, moving at the speed of science. It doesn't matter where it came from. It doesn't matter where it originated from. It doesn't matter if it was gain of function research leaked from a lab in Wuhan, China. That will surely not help you combat it. That will surely not help you deliver treatments, pandemic response. Doesn't matter. From a lab, from gain of function research, from nature, doesn't matter, according to the science. Okay. First of all, everybody, Happy New Year for those who don't follow vivabarneslaw.locals.com. This is not the first live stream by any means. I've been going live during the week. This is the first Sunday night live stream back, 2023. Some of you might notice. Listen to this. Echo. Echo. Does anyone hear an echo? Does anyone notice that the audio is noticeably better? Let me see if actually anybody notices the audio is noticeably better, because if it's not noticeably better, my wife and I, we wasted so much time putting these panels on the side wall of the studio. No echo. Amazing. These things right here, panels, acoustic panels. On the wall, there are two more over there. The entire left wall is acoustic stick-on panels. They're very good. They work when you do it properly. Posted a picture of it in Locals and on Twitter. There's a carpet on the floor, and we might do the ceiling if and when it becomes necessary. But it is the first Viva Barnes Sunday night stream of 2023. And holy shit, people. Like, first of all, there was a lot to catch up on in the last 2 weeks. McCarthy, Alex Jones news, so much news. And then it seems that there is the Shiat is being disturbed in Brazil. We're going to have to talk about it, because apparently extreme MAGA Republicans are responsible for what's going on in Brazil. That's what Hakeem Jeffries wants me to believe. That's what AOC wants me to believe. That's what the hootin' tootin' sleeping with the enemy Eric Swalwell wants us to believe. A lot to talk about. Barnes is wearing, it looks like a leather bomber jacket, people. Hold on, before I bring Barnes in, standard disclaimers. First of all, super chats. Winston Shittenhouse, good to see you again. The Pudge lemon squeezy bottle now on merch store. Not a bad idea. That's Pudge. I have to squeeze pee out of her so that her bladder fully vacates, so that she doesn't get a urinary tract infection. Bill Gates reminds me of the pointy-haired boss in Dilbert. Bill Gates reminds me of the villain in Despicable Me. And once you see it, I don't think you'll be able to ever unsee it. Pasha Moyer, thank you very much for the super chat. Heart Tackle, American-made lures. Happy New Year. Happy fishing. Super chats, YouTube takes 30% of that. If you don't like that, we are simultaneously streaming on the Rumbles, where we will be going exclusively in about a half an hour or so. Let me refresh here and see. 7,500 watching on Rumble. Beautiful. Rumble has Rumble Rants. They take 20%. So better for the platform, better for the content creator, better to support a platform that supports free speech. You all know that. No medical advice, no legal advice, no election fortification advice, although we're going to be talking about all of that. And what else was there? VivaBarnesLaw.locals.com. Okay, Barnes is in the house. I'm bringing him in. 3, 2, 1. Bobby Barnes! How goes the battle, sir?
How goes it? Good.
Robert, I haven't seen you in 2 weeks, and you're looking good.
Yeah, well, looking a lot better than I felt last week. I've been a little under the weather.
Dare I ask, did you get the Rona?
No, I don't think so. It was a stomach flu, I think. That was pretty bad, and then another virus of something else. So it was like just there's these different colds and flus and bugs, and it may have been food poisoning one day. So there was one thing or another for about 4 or 5 days, but feeling better now. So the still in Tennessee, back to Vegas later this week.
I was going to say you look good, but if you had vomitus and diarrhea for a week, that might be looking good not for the good reason.
Yeah, not the best reasons, right?
Was it? I won't ask if diarrhea. I don't so much mind. Vomiting, it's one of my phobias. The chat reminded me once upon a time what it's called. So still in Tennessee, Robert. Okay, look, we've got so much to talk about because last week people were at least on the locals community. They wanted something live. I was watching how many votes did it go to? 13 votes, 14 votes?
15 votes.
15
the most in its history, I believe.
It was amazing. People are dying to know about that, and we've got to talk about it. But let me just bring one last one up before we do this. Kimberly Geiger, Happy New Year. Missed you so much. I'm thankful for you both. Thank you very much. Some people are not so thankful for us, Robert, but they can continue making mean comments on Twitter and in the chat. But Robert, okay, so let's get started on McCarthy. And then hold on. Do you have a book behind you? And do you have a cigar? No.
No,
Okay.
no, in Tennessee.
When we get back to Vegas. Robert, okay, McCarthy. First of all, what is your take on McCarthy as a politician, as a human, as a now Speaker of the House?
He's an old school, classic, conventional politician of the modern type. So he's one of these people that probably was, doing Model UN in high school, those kind of people. These are people that really live for internal politics and love the designation of Speaker of the House. They love the title, the nomenclature. Joe Biden is representative of this group of people. It's the rise of the professionalization of politics in America. And it, in my view, has been a very negative factor in American political life, that we have people who do nothing from the time they're teenagers, but run for office and seek office. We have lawyers, doctors, a bunch of credentialed people who have limited life experience, who are not the best suited people, in my view, to represent people in government. And what we have fewer of is small business people. What we have fewer of is independent entrepreneurs. What we have fewer of is creative types. What we have fewer of is just ordinary, everyday people. Now, we've never had tons of those in government. It's one of the weaknesses of representative government, in my view, is that it dilutes the impact of democracy when you have this interference with someone representing you. And there's just a long, notorious history of people not actually keeping their promises. There's a reason why politicians are as hated as anybody, up there with lawyers and others as professions go. And McCarthy's your classic guy. I mean, even look at his hairdo. Everything about the guy screams professional politician. I can't wait to be named chairman of the Model UN. So there's nothing about him that's trustworthy. Nothing about him that's reliable. I don't see him as a dark figure. He's not the power freak that McConnell is. He's not the nasty war whore that people like Dan Crenshaw, One-Eyed McCain, and some of these other guys are.
It's Eye Patch McCain. He said it today on Twitter, or he said it in an interview. Eye Patch McCain. I say that the most insulting thing about that is.
Did I say One-Eyed McCain?
You said One-Eyed McCain.
Because I think of the One-Eyed Ogre. That's why I think of One-Eyed Ogre, and so that's why I think of him as One-Eyed McCain.
Making fun of the eye patch is juvenile. It's what he looks like. He can't help it. I think the truly insulting thing to him, and I'm not talking about you, Robert. I mean, in general, people call him the Eye Patch McCain. The insulting thing is being compared to McCain, and I think that's actually what insults
the eye patch thing. I mean, people, the eye patch thing gave him his panache, gave him his initial entrevue as this sort of popular figure when Saturday Night Live, made fun of it in sort of inappropriate ways. It's the McCain part. That's why I call him the one eye thing. And the reason why is because he sees the world with one eye. In other words, like the old Homer sort of image, right? The one-eyed giant, or the great film, Oh Brother Art Thou, which is really just a remade version of Homer's Great Odyssey, is that the one-eyed person doesn't see the world fully. And is an ogre of a type. You think of that one big eye in the middle. That when I see Crenshaw, that's who I see. And I don't think McCarthy is like that. He's a weak-kneed, classic, conventional politician, utterly untrustworthy. Won't challenge institutional power for anything. Will capitulate at the moment, at the drop of a hat. Is longtime best buddies with Paul Ryan. Is roommates with Frank Luntz. These are not people you really want to be associating with if you care about ordinary people, populist values, the little d democratic values, old school conservative values. If you're on that side of the aisle, McCarthy is exactly what you don't like. So but McCarthy was more simple in all of this. The issue was the institutional rot that is the House of Representatives of the United States Congress. And it's an institutional rot that has been enabled and facilitated by rule changes over the past several decades. Now, in truth, the House has been crap for most of its history. That's the God's honest truth. And people are like, there was almost a fight on the floor between Mike Rogers and Matt Gaetz. There have been actual fights on the House floor. People have shot each other on the House floor. People have stabbed each other on the House floor. They used to really brawl on the House floor. So that didn't concern me much. What did concern me is that these rules are atrophying democracy and making ordinary people increasingly believe the United States government is unrepresentative of their interest. And that's what this rebellion was about. And it's a rebellion that had been building for decades, frankly. When Gingrich took over in 94, he made a bunch of reform changes that were good. And then they went back on him in the early 2000s under W. And the Democrats never liked him, and so they scrapped him. And these are reforms that just enabled democracy to actually mean something, that your representative be able to, for example, propose an amendment on the floor, that you actually have a bill as a single bill, not 6 things thrown into one.
Let me stop you there. When did that become a custom that what do they call the pig fat or the pork?
They've been doing it sporadically over the decades, but it accelerated under W and then under Pelosi, and then it was continued by the Republicans. I mean, Dennis Hastert, for crying out loud, the Speaker of the House for the Republicans, was a pedo. I mean, that's who they're, this is not something you should be proud of. So these were the kind of leaders, so-called leaders, that were being representative, and then Pelosi after him. And then the various nitwits and losers after on the Republican side, and then back to Pelosi. And so the McCarthy is seen as a weak guy. He's not seen as someone anybody really respects. He's seen as a tool. And the issue was, let's use him and his speakership vote to finally at least create some sort of reform. Probably the most eloquent expression of this was by Chip Roy. I worked with Chip Roy during maybe Chip doesn't want to talk about it, but I worked with him in some different contexts in which he was very sincere and fought very well. I'll put it that way. Might have been in Georgia in 2020. I'll let you put those connections together. But I like Chip. Don't always agree with him, but I respect him. Very independent guy, a guy who does sincerely care about the institution working. And working in a little d democratic way, working in ways that's representative of the people's interest and is reflective of their constitutional obligations. And to their credit, to Matt Gaetz's tremendous credit, Lauren Boebert, others, the Chip Roy, some young congressmen from Arizona, some others, they were able to do something that hadn't been done in a century, which was force 15 votes. And what was the consequence of that? Certain assurances of at least some form of reform. Now, the concern is that once McCarthy became Speaker, that the establishment-oriented House Republicans would then break McCarthy's promise and not go through with the rules reforms. I think that would be a massive, massive mistake by those moderate Republicans. because they'll earn a certain enmity that will lead to major institutional issues going forward in the House. Because while people think that the House vote was a means to force these reforms, it is by no means the only means. There are ways in which people can create all kinds of havoc if McCarthy doesn't keep his word. So I understand the concerns of Richard Barris and others who are like, look, these people have no history of being reliable. They're probably, as soon as you let McCarthy in, they're just going to walk it back and turn around on Monday and not vote through the rules package. That may happen. And I understand where that concern is. I think, though, the institutional leaders, after what they just went through, understand what kind of risk that poses. And I don't think they will. I think you will see them actually go through with the committee promises and the rules changes. What do those rules changes mean? Big rules changes. It means, 3 members of the Freedom Caucus are on the Rules Committee. What does that mean? That means that a whole bunch of stuff, they have veto power over what gets to the floor. The ability to propose legislation yourself directly, the ability to propose amendments directly. I mean, these are real reforms that truly little d democratize the process. What had happened is the House had trophied so bad that a small group of elite people in the Congress could unilaterally decide what legislation was even debated, least of all passed. That, under these reform changes, these are the most dramatic reform changes since Gingrich came in 1994, and arguably the most dramatic reform changes in the history of the House. And I think that if McCarthy keeps his word and the establishment Republicans don't try to blow up the party all over again, then these reforms will make a real difference in the House of Representatives in the upcoming term. What I'm most excited about, I mean, no legislation is going to go through, but the ability to propose legislation, to put policy ideas before the court of public opinion. By the way, some of these reforms that passed, I was working with Ralph Nader to try to get done in the 90s. I mean, this is how long this has been burgeoning, right? The ability to just propose legislation yourself as an individual member of the House, the ability to propose amendments on the floor. This should have all been easy and simple. They had gutted all of it. They had stacked the Rules Committee, so only establishment proposals ever even got debated or discussed. Committees that didn't investigate anything except what the establishment wanted. It would be the biggest thing that I'm looking forward to in the immediate future is what Congressman Thomas Massie said. And it would be humiliating to Kevin McCarthy. It would be humiliating to the Republican Party if they don't do what Thomas Massie said they had agreed to do when it's already published now on Tucker Carlson for the world to see.
And what Massie said were the 10 points or the concessions made so that McCarthy gets the speakership.
The big one is what I've been calling for a half decade is a church committee. That is what's needed. Like some people said, oh, ignore all this. It doesn't matter. You can't pass the legislation. I get that. Recognize in advance, Democrats control the Senate. Democrats control the White House. You're not getting any legislation through. That ain't happening. What you can do is you can block some bad legislation. Number one. Number two, what you can also do is propose ideas that become the ground of a platform moving forward. So people know what the heck is it we're voting for when we vote Republican, because many people still don't know. In the working class North, many of them that stayed home and didn't vote or voted Democrat this past time are like, how am I supposed to trust the Mitch McConnells of the world? That's the utility of being able to have a diverse range of legislative proposals put forward, is see which ideas catch fire and become part of the platform for 2024. But most importantly, from my point of view, is a new church committee. You put Thomas Massie, you put other people like that on that committee. You let that committee, you put Matt Gaetz on that committee. You put some of those folks on that committee. You put Marjorie Taylor Greene on that committee, and McCarthy owes her tremendously after people have been critical of her. She made a very tactical decision. She was going to align with McCarthy to increase her position of power and influence in the House when they've been trying to drive her out, remove her from committees, exclude her from positions of influence, etc. She made a tactically smart decision that was savvy for the agenda she supports, and it's a very populist agenda she supports. So I have no problem whatsoever with how she approached it. I think it was tactically the very wise decision. Just as I have no problem with Matt Gaetz. I'm a big fan of Matt Gaetz, and he proved his utility once again. In how he managed this. He managed this extraordinarily well. But I'm really looking, people should not underestimate the power of an investigative committee. The church committee is the only reason we know about MK Ultra. The Church Committee is the only reason we know about the assassinations. The Church Committee is the only reason we know about a lot of things we know currently about the Kennedy and the King assassinations, both Kennedy assassinations and the King assassination. So while those committees could have been a lot more robust, they could have been a lot more detailed, they could have been a lot better, they were still the most, find another nation in the world that didn't just collapse and fall apart, where they did a meaningful introspection of their most powerful deep state apparatus within the government, right? I mean, did the Soviet Union ever do that? I mean, they did one speech after Stalin by Khrushchev that was in secret. That was about it, right? I mean, that was extraordinary what we did. We exposed our own CIA, our own NSA, our own Pentagon, our own military, our own White House, our own FBI. That was extraordinary. And it was a great period of transparency. It provided and the only way you're going to get reform is for more people to know. So have more of these hearings. Look at what the Twitter files have done. Imagine the Twitter files times 10 on steroids. That's what this church committee can be. So I'm very optimistic about how all this progressed. Credit to all those conservatives who, with the conscience to hold up. Credit to Marjorie Taylor Greene, who's playing it a different way for her own reasons, but I think will ultimately be beneficial also to the populist cause. You need people on both sides in some of the tactically when you're maneuvering in this way. And they outmaneuvered McCarthy and the establishment tremendously. The establishment is enraged. Sean Hannity was crying. He had to put his put on his CIA pin and put on his Pentagon pin, figure out which deep state he was going to whore for today. And he was whining and complaining. It didn't matter. Mark Levin, another fake populist, was whining and complaining. His opinion doesn't matter. Mark Levin disappeared tomorrow. Nobody would care. That's the reality. He's like Bill O'Reilly. Nobody cared. Nobody ever cared. That's what Donald Trump figured out when he went on tour with him. Nobody cares about Bill O'Reilly. Nobody ever did care about Bill O'Reilly. He was a Fox News creation. He was not himself interesting, except for when he blew up, when he was at Access Hollywood. You know, him screaming is the only thing that's memeable about him. That and his illicit sex tapes with workers. So the little phone calls. So people were always useless, and they got exposed again as useless because these folks didn't bend. There's been some criticism of Trump, understandably. Trump was playing it his way, and he played it to his advantage. And we'll see whether it works ultimately to his advantage. Monday will be the determinative vote. If these promises are all broken, Republicans are in serious trouble. The Republican establishment is in serious trouble. If they keep their word, then this is going to be a very promising House session for 2023 and 2024.
Quick question. A church committee has no specific object. It exists and can deal with any subject matter that's brought before it.
So it depends on how it's vested. Now, according to the courts, I mean, this was the dangerous of what Democrats did. It used to be the case that the committee was limited by the committee's internal jurisdiction, and that was limited by the vote of the whole House authorizing what they could look at, who could be on it, ranking members were chosen in a certain way, so on and so forth. However, Democrats have eviscerated all that, all for their little January 6th show hearings. They eviscerated all those limitations. Now there's none. There's none. The courts were eager to let the January 6th committee run rampant. Okay, if those are the new rules, we get to do the same thing. That means if we don't want Democrats on the committee, fine. No Democrats are on the committee. Or our hand-picked 4 or 5 Democrats that we like. Or we just don't put them on the committee. We're not limited by the jurisdiction of what's put into the original order. We don't have to have the committee chairman sign off. These are the new rules that Democrats set and the D.C. courts, pro-establishment courts set. Now we'll see if they suddenly change and so, well, now that we think about it, now that you're looking at the CIA, because courts are notoriously wusses when it comes to dealing with the powerful interest in American society, sadly. So we'll see. But theoretically, there's no limits based on that precedent. Typically, before the January 6th committee process, it's limited by the jurisdiction that is established by the committee, so by the full House. Now, my understanding is what the authority is going to be is to look into the entire. It's broad. What the church committee was a select committee on intelligence before there was any committee on intelligence to look at the entire intelligence community in the United States. This is supposed to be even broader. Is to look at everything. It was like a combination of the church committee and the House committee on assassinations. And it's combining the two and looking at all of the weaponized politicization and partisan use and misuse and abuse of lawfare in America by the Justice Department, by the Federal Bureau of Investigation, by the IRS, by the Department of Homeland Security, by the Central Intelligence Agency, by the National Security Agency, everything and everybody. We'll see if they keep their word on it. But if they do, it will be the most powerful committee, arguably, in the history of the country.
Second question, and actually someone had asked it, and I feel smarter for having thought of it. Will single-member amendments be used as a weapon for Democrats to tie things up on the floor when legislation is voted on? Like, if anybody can...
Oh, that's good to me. Well, let everybody propose amendments. Let people... That's what the legislative process is supposed to be about. It's not supposed to be a few people at the top, meet with some lobbyists, and cram down the vote on everybody else. That's not what it was ever supposed to be. Why do we have 435 representatives if only 15 get to make decisions? And that's what Chip Roy's point was. He's like, look, the whole country increasingly doubts whether left or right, whether our system works. When people see debate, like what they saw over the last week, that's a good thing. That's what we should see. We should see honest debate, honest dialogue, honest discussion, open multiple member participation where the American people can participate at some level. That was the most interesting House vote any American has ever personally witnessed, because nobody witnessed the 1921 or the 1856. Yeah, exactly. I mean, outside of the people that were in the gallery, for people that don't know, we've gone months without a speaker. So, I mean, we've gone hundreds of votes without speakers.
Let me ask that. That was the next question. Like in 1856, when it went 114 or whatever votes.
3 months, 4 months, something like that.
So what happens? Like, first of all, what are the actual powers?
Let's say, nobody's going to be crying that the House can't vote, right? Whenever the government shuts down, they always say the world's going to fall apart, and then the world never falls apart. It's like, yeah, let's shut it down for a little while. So see how it works. So it works for a month, 2 months, a couple of months. Hey, you know what? It works better. The world looks better when the government can't work. When no bureaucrat can get into their office, everybody's better off.
Robert, it might be very analogous to Twitter. Cut 75% of the workforce, and it still runs good, and maybe even better.
Productive. It's more productive.
So the Speaker of the House, do they actually have concrete powers that are important, or is it a figurehead?
Oh no, they have concrete powers. A lot of concrete powers. Yep.
Okay.
So appointments to committees, a whole bunch of things. But effectively, what this did is re-democratize a lot of that power, so that his power is less distilled in him as an individual.
I know that you don't think much of the WEF things, but there's a page on the WEF for McCarthy. He attended the conference, from what I understand, in 2018. Does he represent globalist interests?
Though. I mean, he's a schmuck. I mean, that's the best way to understand him. He's a guy that, go with the wind, right? I mean, this guy's not like McConnell. He has a truly defined agenda, some of which on the judicial and legal side, as Mike Davis pointed out, shared a lot. Conservatives had a lot to share in common with that. But the other part of McConnell's agenda was very much a corporatist globalist agenda. And there he was a great harm. But he believes it. I don't think anybody believes Kevin McCarthy really believes anything. I mean, that's the truth. Kevin McCarthy believes in Kevin McCarthy, and he wants to get promoted, and he loves having the little gavel. That's who Kevin McCarthy is. That's why he's not, like, when people were saying, well, just keep voting no. I'm like, well, there needs to be an exit plan here. I mean, I get maybe just shut down the House for the 2 years, see what happens, see how the government reacts. Okay, you could play that angle, but that's what you're playing because there wasn't an alternative. The core problem is the Republican caucus has a minority of populists in it. Steve Scalise probably would have been worse than McCarthy. You can make different arguments about some of the other names. I had proposed Trump, as a temporary solution, and that's where it was going to go if McCarthy didn't fold. And it was useful. Trump played this well. I mean, without getting into too much details, what was publicly seen is that Trump put McCarthy over the top. What may have been privately the case is that Trump was leveraging it and telling McCarthy that if he didn't concede on a bunch of the concessions being demanded, that he would replace him instead. And so McCarthy folded pretty quick within 3 days. And that's a sign also who McCarthy is. But he folded on things that, again, have not been done in the modern era of the House of Representatives, giving real power to not only the Freedom Caucus, but more importantly to the individual House member. And calling again for a committee that's only been formed once in American history. That you could argue the War Racketeering Committee is very similar, or 1930s, run by the great Senator Gerald Nye out of North Dakota. That's where we got all the war racketeering information and about how war is a racket. And, Smedley Butler, all the investigative files came out in that committee. Fantastic research they did. They showed who was making money off of World War I, who was trying to make money off of getting into World War II. I mean, all that was fantastic. Those are probably the two greatest committees in the history of the House of Representatives. And this has the potential to be the third greatest, and maybe the greatest of all three if it really is powerful. So that I'm hopeful that that's where it goes. And I think that was a smarter strategy than let's just try to stop. Let's try to shut down the House for 2 years.
Robert, I'm looking at what's the word I'm looking for? Rumble's new interface. And now does everyone see as a highlighted Rumble rant, Tinagwen? Because if the rants can now be highlighted the way I want it to, that would be phenomenal on Rumble. Okay, so I had one more question about McCarthy. Well, what would have happened? What would have happened if a speaker had not been appointed? What does it mean when the government shuts down for 3 months or 2 months? What concretely, what would that look like?
We've had examples of it. I mean, because the government leaves partially shut down multiple times over the last 20 years. So, I mean, 1994, 95, or 95, actually, after the 94 elections. Again, in the early 2000s, again, in the mid-2000s, again, of course, during COVID. And so, essentially, what it tends to happen is the essential services continue, and the unessential services get scrapped, and most people can't tell the difference. So it tells you a lot about what is essential and unessential. But as a practical political matter, just shutting down the House would have been an interesting thing, but it had a lot of political risk, and it had none of the potential upside. I get that, and again, I would wait. For example, let's say they go squirrely and they say, no, we're not going to make these rules changes, et cetera. There are, even within this current system, my understanding of the current rules, 5 House members can all of a sudden revoke the speaker, and all of a sudden you're right back to the beginning again. So if those are the rules that go into place. So that's why I don't think that I get why people are skeptical, very deservedly so. But I think this is going to be different, because also there are things going on behind the scenes that I think McCarthy and the moderates are not going to make the mistake of doing that. I think they're going to, because of Gates, because of Bilbert, because of the way everybody played their part, Marjorie Taylor Greene and President Trump, in ways known and unknown. We have an opportunity for the House to, that's the only thing Republicans control. It's the only place populists have any real influence. They have a little bit in the Senate, but very marginal because Democrats control it. You aggregate those, and you have the opportunity for for them really leveraging their only source of federal power to an extraordinary degree. Now you still have people like DeSantis doing great work in Florida on the grand jury for vaccines and other things. And Bolsonaro in Brazil. You have Carrie Lake still litigating her case. We have the Virgin Islands prosecutor getting fired for suing Jeffrey.
We got tons.
Tons of stuff, but a lot of that is going to have to be a Rumble conversation.
Well, we are going there right now. But Robert, even before we get into that on Rumble, I got to ask you about Santos. We'll get there. Everybody, the link to Rumble is in the pinned comment. And I just posted it again. We're going to end it on YouTube in 3 seconds. Everyone move over to Rumble. We're 5,700 and change here, and we are 13,000 plus on Rumble. Everyone move over there, and we shall continue the evening in 3, 2.
One addendum in response to various locals comments throughout the week. I read all the locals comments. I note that by liking the comment. Unless I really hate the comment, I like the comment. Even if I don't agree with it or may disagree with it, I usually like it. At vivabarneslaw.locals.com. But there was reason for me not to comment publicly on the speaker thing until it all worked a certain way. So that's why I wasn't going to comment on it until now.
Okay. Well, now that's going to add to the mystery, but I'll read between the lines. Okay. Ending on YouTube, heading over to Rumble right now. 3, 2, 1.